Northern Montana, January 1978. Nobody paid much attention to the soft glow coming from Vernon Hadley's barn that winter. Not at first. Out there, light after dark was nothing special. A kerosene lamp, maybe a man fixing equipment late. Ranch work did not stop just because the sun went down, but the light stayed steady night after night. It did not flicker or disappear when the wind screamed down from Canada at 40 miles an hour. It did not go out when the temperature dropped to 20 below. It was there every evening, calm and stubborn, like it refused to be pushed away by the cold. What no one knew, what no one could see through the old plank walls of that barn, was that Vernon Hadley was not storing hay or repairing machinery. He was living inside a narrow tunnel of corrugated steel that he had built right in the middle of the barn. A quiet hut, 12 feet wide and 20 feet long, curved like a half moon, shining silver in the lamplight. It sat 40 feet from the nearest outside wall, wrapped in still air and shadow. The whole county thought Vernon had lost his mind. His original cabin still stood 200 yards east of the barn. By frontier standards, it was a decent place. Hand-cut logs, chinked tight as best a man could manage, with a stone foundation that Vernon had stacked himself. He had built it in 1974, proud of every log and every joint. But pride did not stop the wind. The northwest gusts found every small gap, every weak seam. Firewood stayed damp under tarps that never quite worked. The propane ration that year was expensive and unreliable. Some weeks, delivery trucks never showed up at all. Vernon was not freezing because he was careless. He was freezing because the math no longer worked. Each winter, he burned more wood, 12 cords a season, sometimes more. Still, he woke to frost on the inside of his windows. He could feel cold air slide across the floor like water, snuffing out a candle 6 feet from the hearth. Carrying wood inside meant carrying snow and moisture with it. Logs hissed and smoked instead of burning hot. Nights were the worst. He would wake in the dark, teeth chattering, feeding the fire again and again, just to keep the cabin from slipping into the 30s. More wood meant more cutting, more hauling, more hours away from the livestock. And in January of 1978, with fuel prices doubled and roads turning bad, inefficiency was not just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Vernon did what most men around him would never consider. He decided not to build bigger or stronger. He decided to build smaller. In November, he came across the answer by accident. A neighbor 2 valleys over was tearing down an old equipment shed, military surplus from the 1950s. Corrugated steel arches 8 feet wide bolted together into a tunnel, the kind the Army once used for storage in field hospitals. Lightweight, portable, tight when assembled right. Vernon recognized it the moment he saw it. He bought the whole thing for $60 and a case of beer. His plan was simple. He would build it inside the barn, not beside it, not attached to it, inside it. The barn itself was 40 by 60 feet, built in the 1920s, with hand-hewn beams and thick planks. It leaked light through 100 cracks, but the bones were solid. Vernon cleared the center bay, leveled the dirt floor, and bolted the steel arches together on a timber frame. 12 feet wide, 20 feet long, 7 feet tall at the highest point. A smooth steel half-cylinder sitting entirely within the barn with open space on all sides. He packed 8 inches of sawdust into the floor and laid planks over it. He cut a door into one end. He installed a small barrel stove. Nothing fancy, just a vertical drum with a 6-inch pipe running up and out through the barn roof. He hung a kerosene lamp from the ridgeline and nailed simple shelves along the curved steel walls. Then he moved in. Vernon did not explain his thinking in fancy terms. He did not talk about heat loss or thermal envelopes. When neighbors asked what he was doing, he simply said he was tired of freezing. That was when the laughter started. To anyone who saw it, the setup looked wrong. A silver tunnel glowing in the middle of a dark, drafty barn. Hay bales stacked around it, old equipment pushed to the sides. It looked like a bunker, like a man hiding from something. In a place where toughness mattered, it looked like retreat. People talked. At the grain elevator, at the diner, After church on Sunday, the story spread. Vernon Hadley was living in his barn now, built himself a metal can, said it was warmer. Some shook their heads. Some smirked. A few laughed outright. Charlie Brennan, a carpenter with 30 years of experience, stopped by in late November. He stood in the barn doorway, arms crossed, staring at the curved steel like it offended him. He said it was not a home. He said it was a grain bin. He warned about condensation, about overheated walls, about what would happen when the real cold came. Vernon did not argue. He nodded. He said it worked. Others were harsher. Paul Dietrich, a rancher proud of his toughness, laughed when he saw the cot and the sleeping bag inside the steel shell. He said real men did not hide from winter. At the post office, Vernon overheard someone say that a man with a good cabin should not be sleeping in a barn. Even his sister called from Billings, worried. "People are talking," she said. "They think you are struggling." Vernon told her the truth. He was warmer than he had been in years. He was burning half the wood. He was sleeping through the night. Lonely, maybe, but alive and rested. By mid-December, he stopped going into town unless he had to. Not because he felt ashamed, but because he was tired of explaining something that seemed obvious to him. The steel shell stopped drafts. The barn blocked the wind. The open space between them stayed still, acting like a buffer. His firewood stacked inside the barn stayed dry. Dry wood burned hot. A small space needed less heat. That was all there was to it. Inside the Quonset hut, the calm was noticeable. No wind at all. The barn creaked and rattled around him, but inside the steel curve, the air stayed still. The stove did not need much fuel. One piece of dry pine every couple of hours kept the temperature steady. The walls reflected heat back into the space. There were no cold corners, no freezing floorboards. Vernon kept a small notebook on a plank table. Every few hours, he wrote down the temperature inside and out. Old habit from the Navy. Measure what matters. Learn from it. Outside, winter gathered itself. On January 7th, the weather warnings came over the radio. A massive system dropping out of Alberta. Slow moving. Heavy. Temperatures falling hard. Winds over 50 miles an hour. Snow for days. People listened with tight faces and busy hands. Ranchers rushed to shelter livestock. Families sealed windows and stacked supplies. Everyone knew what that kind of forecast meant. By January 9th, the temperature was already dropping fast. 18 below in the morning, 28 below by noon. The wind turned the air sharp enough to hurt exposed skin. Then the snow began, heavy and driven sideways. Vernon heard the storm on the barn roof that first night. A steady roar that swallowed every other sound. He fed the stove, closed the door, and lay down on his cot. The steel walls held the warmth close. The lamp cast soft light across the curved ceiling. Outside, the cold tightened its grip on the valley. Inside the barn, inside the steel shell, Vernon slept. He did not know yet how bad it would get. He did not know that roads would vanish, that power lines would snap, that neighbors would run out of fuel and start burning furniture. He only knew that for the first time in years, winter was not winning. The coldest blizzard in 45 years was coming. And when it arrived in full force, everything people thought they knew about survival was about to be tested. By the morning of January 10th, the storm had settled in like something alive. The wind did not come in bursts anymore. It stayed constant, a deep roaring sound that pressed against walls and nerves alike. Snow moved sideways, not falling so much as attacking. Fence posts vanished. Drifts climbed past windows. Roads turned into white trenches with no edges. Inside his barn, Vernon listened to it all. The old boards groaned, nails complained, dust drifted down from the rafters, but inside the Quonset hut, the air stayed calm. The barrel stove glowed a steady orange. Vernon fed it a single piece of pine, closed the door, and watched the thermometer rise back to 62 degrees. He wrote it down in his notebook. Date. Time, inside temperature, outside temperature, estimated from the radio report. He did not do it because he expected anyone to see it. He did it because numbers told the truth when opinions did not. By noon, the radio crackled with updates. Power outages reported across the county. Drifts too deep for plows. Livestock losses already starting in open pasture. Vernon turned the volume down and went back to splitting wood inside the barn. He worked in his shirt sleeves. The motion kept him warm, and the barn kept the wind off him. Each log he split went straight onto a growing stack along the interior wall, dry and protected. A mile and a half south, Ed Larson was not having the same day. Ed's house was newer than Vernon's cabin. 2 stories, framed tight, insulated well for its time. He trusted it. He trusted the propane furnace more. When the furnace shut down that afternoon, the house went quiet in a way that made his stomach drop. The tank was empty. It was supposed to have been filled weeks earlier, but the truck never came. Ed switched to his wood stove. He dug through snow to reach his firewood pile. What he pulled free was soaked. Logs steamed and smoked. The stove took forever to heat. By nightfall, the temperature inside the house hovered just above 40. That was happening all over the county. Families slept in one room. People nailed blankets over doors. Some ran engines in garages to stay warm, risking more than the cold. The wind howled without mercy. It rattled windows until they shook in their frames. It pulled heat straight out of walls. By January 11th, the storm worsened. Snow fell heavy and wet, collapsing sheds and flattening lean toes. Wind gusts hit 50 miles an hour. Power crews could not reach broken lines. Radios became lifelines. Voices on the emergency channel sounded tired and strained. Vernon stayed inside the Quonset most of the day, not because he was afraid, but because there was no reason to go out. He cooked on the stove. He read by lamplight. He slept. When he woke in the night, the temperature inside the hut was 57 degrees. Outside, the radio said it was 40 below. He added a log and went back to sleep. On the 12th, the cold reached a level people talked about for years afterward. The official reading in Cut Bank dropped to 47 below zero. With wind chill, it touched 70 below. Diesel gelled. Breath froze in beards. Exposed skin burned and went numb in seconds. Cattle died standing up. Inside the barn, the air was cold but still. Inside the Quonset, the thermometer read 64 degrees at midday. Vernon checked the stovepipe, checked the door seal, and wrote the numbers down. He burned less than 20 pounds of wood that day. He thought about his neighbors. He knew some of them were struggling. He considered going out, but travel was impossible. The road was gone. Snowmobiles were the only things moving, and even they struggled against the wind. That night, as the storm peaked, Vernon lay awake listening. The barn shook under the force of the gusts. Snow piled against the walls, adding weight and pressure. But inside the steel curve, the warmth stayed wrapped around him. No drafts, no cold fingers crawling across the floor. Just quiet heat. He slept 8 hours straight. The blizzard held on for 6 days. When the sky finally cleared on January 15th, it did not bring relief right away. The cold stayed. The air turned sharp and bright. Sunlight reflected off snow so white it hurt the eyes. Drifts stood 10 feet high in places. Vehicles were buried. Roads would not open for another week. The first person to reach Vernon's place was Ed Larson. He came in on a snowmobile that afternoon, engine screaming against the frozen air. He expected to find Vernon in bad shape. Maybe holed up in the old cabin, wrapped in blankets, low on wood like everyone else. Instead, he found Vernon outside the barn, splitting logs. Ed cut the engine and pulled off his face covering. The cold hit him like a wall. Vernon looked up, calm and steady, breath barely visible. "You okay?" Ed shouted. Vernon nodded, doing fine. Ed stared at him. "You serious?" "I about froze solid." Vernon set the axe down. "Come see." Inside the barn, the change was immediate. The wind vanished. The air felt almost mild. Ed stomped snow from his boots, breath slowing as he followed Vernon toward the center bay. Then he saw it. The silver Quonset hut sat there quietly, its curved surface catching light through the gaps in the boards. Vernon opened the door. Warm air rolled out. Ed stepped inside and stopped. He blinked like he did not trust his own senses. A thermometer hung from a steel rib near the door. 68 degrees.
"You're kidding me," Ed said.
Vernon shook his head. He pointed to the notebook on the table, logged it every 4 hours. Ed picked it up. The entries were neat and steady. Time, inside temperature, outside temperature. The numbers did not lie. On the worst night, when it was 47 below outside, the inside never dropped below 55. "How much wood?" Ed asked. Vernon flipped to the back page. 112 pounds. 6 days. Ed laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I burned that in half a day." They stood there in silence for a moment. The math settled in. The difference was not small. It was huge. Vernon explained it simply. No big words, no lectures. The shell stopped drafts. The barn killed the wind. Still air held heat. Dry wood burned right. Small space was easier to warm. Ed nodded slowly. "Does Charlie know?" Vernon smiled a little. "Not yet." Word spread fast once travel became possible. People came on snowmobiles and on foot. They came cold, tired, and curious. Vernon showed them the setup. He showed them the notebook. He answered questions without pride or anger. Some apologized. Some just stood there, quiet, staring at the steel walls and the steady warmth. Charlie Brennan came in early February. He walked around the Quonset, tapped the steel, studied the stovepipe. He did not say much. When he finally spoke, he said it was warm. That was enough. By the time winter began to loosen its grip, something had changed in the valley. People were not laughing anymore. They were thinking. They were measuring. They were redoing old ideas in their heads. Vernon did not celebrate. He did not feel proven right in a way that needed applause. He had only wanted to stay warm and alive. The storm had done the rest. But the story was not finished yet. Because what Vernon had built did more than save one man through one blizzard. It planted an idea. And by the time spring came, that idea was already taking root in places no one expected. That is when the quiet change really began. Spring came late in 1978. Snow stayed on the ground into April, packed hard and gray along fence lines. Roads reopened slowly. People moved carefully, like the land itself was still deciding whether winter was finished. But once travel became possible again, the talk did not stop. It shifted. The laughter was gone. In its place was something quieter: curiosity, respect, a little embarrassment. The first man to act on what he had seen was Hank Faboda, a rancher 15 miles south. Hank had nearly frozen his family that winter. He lost firewood to moisture and spent nights feeding a stove that never seemed to win. He did not have a Quonset hut, but he had an old dairy barn and a stack of leftover steel roofing panels. In March, Hank built a small shelter inside the barn, 12 feet by 14, framed with simple lumber, steel panels on the inside, straw bales packed around the gaps, a small stove vented through the roof. It was rough, not airtight like Vernon's, not pretty. But when another cold snap hit late that month, Hank's family slept warm for the first time all season. Word spread again. By summer, 3 more families had built their own versions. One used a pole barn with a tight inner room lined in sheet metal. Another cut a door into an old grain bin and installed a stove. A third insulated a corner of an existing barn and lived in that space during the worst weeks of winter. None of them copied Vernon exactly. They did not need to. They understood the idea: make the space smaller, stop the wind, keep the wood dry. The county extension agent came by in May. His name was Robert Kilmer. He carried a notebook and a camera. He asked careful questions. He measured the Quonset. He photographed the stove setup. He copied numbers from Vernon's logs. Robert wrote a bulletin that fall. It explained the idea in plain terms. It showed diagrams. It listed wood consumption and temperature differences. He titled it Efficient Cold Weather Shelter: Lessons from the 1978 Blizzard. Copies circulated through Montana and into Wyoming and the Dakotas. Some people ignored it. Some laughed again, quieter this time, but others saved it. They folded it and put it away. People who lived far out. People who knew how close they had come to losing everything that winter. Vernon stayed where he was. He did not move back to the cabin. He sold it a few years later to a young couple starting out. They fixed it up and made it their own. Vernon stayed in the Quonset year-round. Over time, he made small changes. A south-facing window for daylight, a simple entry area to cut heat loss, a rack above the stove for drying clothes. Nothing dramatic, just refinements. By his third winter, he could predict his wood use almost exactly. 5 pounds off at most. He stopped thinking about survival. It became routine. People stopped calling it strange. They called it Vernon's place. Years passed. Winters came and went. Some were mild, some were hard. None matched the blizzard of 1978. But the memory of it stayed sharp. People still measured cold snaps against it. Still said things like, "Not like 78, thank God." Vernon lived in the Quonset for another 18 years. He aged quietly. His hair went gray. His hands stayed strong. He worked when he needed to. He rested when he did not. He never chased attention. He never claimed he had figured something out that others had not. He only said that the weather did not care about pride. In 1996, a journalist from a regional magazine drove out to see him. The story had grown over time, changed in retelling. Some versions made it sound heroic. Others made it sound strange. The journalist wanted the truth. Vernon showed him the barn, the Quonset, the stove. He pulled out the old notebook. Its pages yellowed now, numbers still clear. The journalist asked if he would do it again. Vernon thought for a moment. "I would skip the part where everyone calls me crazy," he said. "But yes, I would do it again." The journalist asked why. Vernon looked out across the snow. "Because when it is 47 below and the wind is trying to tear your house apart, you do not need approval. You need something that works." That was the whole answer. Vernon passed away a few years later. Quietly, in his sleep, warm, the barn still stood. The Quonset still sat inside it, unchanged. People who bought the land later kept it, not because they needed it, but because it reminded them of something important. The blizzard of 1978 killed cattle. It collapsed buildings. It pushed families to the edge. But it also stripped away comfort stories people told themselves about toughness. It showed that suffering was not the same thing as strength. That endurance did not mean refusing to adapt. Vernon Hadley did not fight the winter. He stepped around it. He did not build bigger walls or burn more fuel. He reduced the problem until it made sense. Smaller space, still air, dry wood, simple physics. In the end, that was what kept him alive. And in places where winter still comes hard and fast, that lesson still matters.